So delighted to be here with you today. Listening to the conversations over the past 2 days, I think that, and being sort of the last act here before you go into your afternoon sessions, and also standing between you and lunch, I want to get right to the point. You've had a lot of conversation over the last 2 days talking about strategy, had some conversation where we've referenced culture. What I really want to talk to you today is about the intersection of strategy and culture, and how many of you in here are maybe struggling or have struggled in the past to sort of bring those two together to really make a change in your organizations. I'm working with the idea that the room is mostly individuals who have a responsibility for making sure that their organization is strategically focused and making sure that the body of the organization is aware of what's happening, where the organization is going, and what their role is in getting it there. So I'll talk to you a little bit about that today. That would be me. Okay, so first, raise your hand in the room here if you've had this experience in any, following experiences in any of the time that you've been working with strategy. Either it feels like you're going through the motions, you've got this false collaboration going on where people are like inviting people in, but people feel like their voice isn't really heard. A lot of talk, a little action, an amazing plan with no legs. Lots of inertia on a spreadsheet. Raise your hand if you've had any of those experiences in strategy. Okay, and that is, that's what I expected, and that's why I'm here today. I'm excited to talk to you about if you've ever wondered what's been missing there, culture often shows up as sort of that key lever there that when you're not aware of it, as you've heard it, it'll eat up everything. You heard it several times earlier today. So let me first, one of the things we do when we work with organizations, we're very clear in every conversation, every interaction, we start with the POA. Why are we here? How are we going to use your time? This is our purpose, our outcomes, and agenda. We call that a POA. And it's really to empower leaders to more effectively leverage culture when developing and implementing a strategy. Okay? Outcomes, I'm hoping at the end of my time with you today, you've got a clear understanding of the power of culture during development and implementation of a strategy. And my real goal is to leave you with some ideas and some actual tools that you can use, okay? That you can actually start using tomorrow with your teams, with wherever you are. That's the idea. 3 things I want to talk to you about today. I want to talk about strategy, real briefly, because we've heard a lot about it in the last day and a half, but I want to give you a view that we've used very effectively. The essential conversations of strategy. I want to talk about culture as a lever of performance, and then ultimately implementation when you bring strategy and culture together. Okay? And I'd like this to be interactive, so as I go through these 3 pieces, I'd like you to ask any questions for each one. I'm going to go real quickly through strategy, going to take a few more minutes with culture, and then would like to spend the bulk of the time with, okay, so how do you bring these pieces together? All right? So a little bit about us. The Clearing is a Washington, D.C.-based consulting firm. So yes, I flew all the way across to come have fun with you guys. We focus on leadership, strategy, and peak performance culture. Our clients, being in Washington, D.C., of course, the federal government is a huge client, has been for many years. But we also have a presence in Fortune 1000 companies and a big presence in nonprofits and NGOs. The World Bank, United Nations, NATO, UN, they all have a presence in DC, and we've worked with them in the area of strategy and leadership development. The cool thing about working with the Clearing is that we like to think, and we are very intentional about focusing on causes that matter. We will take up any cause of any size if we think it's going to make a difference in the world that we're inhabiting, and for me personally, the world I'm raising my child in. We have a set of primes, and I'll share a couple of these with you today. We have a set of things called primes, and they're universal patterns of behavior that you will recognize. They're cute little pictures. I invite you to use them freely. It's on theprimes.com, and this presentation has all this information in it, and I know you have it on your flash drive. But the primes are actionable insights that we've discovered over the last 30 years that exist in an organization whether you're aware of them or not, and our goal is to make you aware of them so you can be intentional about how you engage. And I'll share a few of those with you today. So about me, I've got almost 35 years experience out here. I like to tell everybody I started as a child prodigy at 5. And I've partnered with the president of the World Bank, the head of the Marine Corps, the heads of industry from large defense contractors, Harris contractors. One of my favorite was Coca-Cola Company and Mars, because chocolate and soda, what else do you need? But I've been doing that for nearly 35 years. And out of that, a couple of questions I find that I often like to ask people is, when I'm engaging with the leader, my first thing is I want to understand where they are on their journey. Because what makes a leader successful is knowing where they are and where they're going to go, just like what makes a company successful, knowing where you are and where you're trying to get to. And then my other question is, okay, now that we're clear about where you are on your journey and we've got something big and bold and audacious that we want to take on, what do you really have the stomach for? Because this kind of work, this change and transformation that we're in, most of the strategy work we do is about transforming organizations. So you've really got to have the stomach for it, and you've got to have the willingness to stay the course. So it's an important question to ask yourself every time you're engaging in a strategy. If you're starting to talk about your culture, then you are most likely talking about something that's transformational, okay? So those are just a couple of thoughts I wanted to share with you about who we are. All right, so let me jump into the first of three parts, which is really talking about strategy. I like to break strategy down into a couple of 5 essential conversations. And my experience has been in all the years across all these industries that if you can get a group of leaders aligned on these 5 key areas, the possibilities are boundless for them. So the 5 areas are, and our whole focus is building alignment around these 5 areas. When we build that alignment, then we teach people how to maintain it over time, then we actually start to see results. Okay, so this is one of our first primes. It's called Core Prime, and it highlights the 5, and that's as complex as our pictures get, which is really what's great about them. These are the 5 critical conversations. The first one is, getting a clear understanding of what is true today in an organization. And you heard yesterday, I believe, that there are some 550 different frameworks out there for doing strategy. They all fundamentally have this same concept at their core. This, to me, is just really simple. It's really quick for people to absorb, and it's something that you can take this tool and apply it. You'll notice some of my slides are kind of heavy. I've done that on purpose, so you can have that sheet that you can print out and use as a tool, okay, when you're actually doing this with your organization. So the first step is to know what's true today within your organization. The second step is know what's happening outside the organization. What's going on outside the organization that will affect any future that you choose to pursue, okay? Once again, bringing the top leader and the initial leadership in the room to get clear on this is the first starting point. Third critical conversation is really about stake. So what? Now that we know what's going on inside the org and what's going on outside the org, does it matter? Is there a compelling enough reason to do anything different than what we're doing? We call that stake. And you heard one of my co-presenters yesterday talk about understanding that stake shows up in the head, the heart, and we like to say the wallet. 3 places that stake really impacts people. Fourth conversation is, okay, now that we know who we are, we have a reason to do anything different, we know what's at stake, now, and only now, are we ready to say, okay, so what's possible? What change do we want to make in the world? What do we want to bring into fruition? Once you know where you are, you know why you want to do anything different than what you're currently doing, you have an exciting and compelling vision or to-be state that you want to move towards, then you're ready to develop something called strategy, which is really about focusing the right people on the critical few most important initiatives to move from where you are today to where you are tomorrow. And I heard one of my colleagues earlier talk about everything can be done in 90 days. Totally agree. You're going to set out a 3 to 5 year plan, but you darn sure better break it down into 90-day or 3-month increments if you really want to get people moving and motivated. All right? So this is the heart of our strategy work, and I've been doing this very effectively, like I said, for over 30 years in all across industry, whether it's been government, for-profit, non-profit, have worked with American Red Cross, works with Girl Scouts, I guess they'll work with Boy Scouts too. Very simple model, very, very effective. Questions on that one before I move on? Just on the strategy angle. Very familiar to you? This format of as is, to be, how do you close the gap? Okay. All right, so let's talk a little bit about culture then, and how it really is a lever for performance in an organization. So the first thing I tell leaders, I do a lot of leadership coaching, leadership development. The very first thing I share with the leader is that you cannot mandate culture. You know, they think they can come in and say, I'm going to write down my culture. This is what this is who we're going to be. This is how we're going to be. This is it. You can't. It's helpful to get a group of people together and have them articulate the culture that they want, the culture that they need in service of the vision they're pursuing, is what I would say. If this is the world that we want to create and the impact we want to have on the world, then the question is who and how do we need to be in order to create that impact in the world? So that's the way I talk to leaders about culture. The way I'd encourage you to think about culture is the line that shows up in an organization or in a group. It's the line between what's tolerated and what's not tolerated. That is one of the most simplest, sort of actionable definitions of culture. And I call it actionable because that's a place where leaders at every level can lean in. If you think about culture as the line between what's tolerated and what's not tolerated, what I've done many times with organizations is just literally draw a line on the board and say, okay, let's do an as is and a to be. What's tolerated today and what's not tolerated today? Is that who we want to be? Does that serve the future that we're trying to create? If it doesn't, invite them into a conversation about, let's draw a new line. Let's talk about what, how we want to show up in the world, what we want to aspire to, what behaviors do we want to tolerate, and what behaviors do we not tolerate. And let me tell you, you take a group of, you start with the leadership and then you go throughout the organization. I've done it with as many as 500-600 people in the room, getting them really to come in and own it. I didn't say that before with strategy, but the most important thing in those 5 conversations is that you invite people into that conversation early. Invite in leaders and invite in laggards, okay? Because they're all part of your future. You've got to understand where they are and what your landscape looks like so you know what it's going to take for you to move your organization from where it is today to where you need it to be tomorrow. So the behavior, the line between what's tolerated and not tolerated. The power there that red line represents is that you as a leader, and I believe everyone in an organization is a leader in some regards, but from formal leadership all the way down to the informal leaders, people that sort of run things around the water cooler, those individuals reinforce that line every day. Meaning when someone does something, you as a leader, what you get to do, the power that makes this actionable is that if you've got a culture that you are trying to promote and reinforce, as I said, you can't dictate it, you can't mandate it, but you can absolutely reinforce it. Culture is defined in the 1,000 moments every day that someone crosses that line. And it's really powerful leaders that are aware of that and makes an organization aware. The most amazing moment is when you're in an organization and you see one of your middle-level staff calling someone out because they crossed the line. And a very common one is the use of profanity. There are some organizations where it's rampant, and it does affect how people show up. It affects how you feel coming into work. And when nothing is said in that moment, the line is reinforced. When someone uses profanity and nothing is said, it's reinforced. When they use profanity and something is said, the line is shifted up again. So that is the power of culture. That's the power that each of you have in your organizations to help shape and reinforce a culture. What makes this really exciting is when you actually get together in groups, not pockets, and I know someone else earlier was talking about the challenges of starting with just rank and file. This is something that while it can't be mandated by leadership, it needs to be modeled by leadership. So it's really powerful to start at the top and then go all throughout. There's no place that this should stop, where you have that conversation. I've had clients that have a wall, and they just keep their behaviors up there. This is what we like, this is what we don't. I've talked a lot about calling people out when they cross the line on the bottom. Actually, research has shown that the most powerful way to reinforce a culture is when you acknowledge when someone is living into the culture. So the complimenting people and calling people out when they've done something that's really bold and big above the line. Okay? One more on here, and then I'll take some questions. This is a really powerful graphic. We call this shaping behavior. And it's one of my favorites. I've actually used it with a major city in the U.S. before, just like the city knew it had a culture issue and it decided it wanted to do something about it. And I'll give you the quick and dirty on this, But I will tell you, theprimes.com, you can go out there, and all of these are out there with nice little write-ups that you can read about. We encourage you to use them liberally in your organizations. So this basically says that shaping behavior in organizations or in groups, at the very bottom of this, when an individual moral compass is how the culture is defined, that is your most effective and least costly mechanism for establishing and maintaining a culture in an organization. As you move up, then it becomes culture, and a culture is a collection of individual moral compasses. So moral compass is at the individual level, where everyone is sort of policing themselves. Culture is the next level, where the group is saying, this is what we tolerate and this is what we don't, and we're going to call you out, plus or minus when you go up or above or below that line. All of those, very effective for organizations, less costly. What I have found often when I go into organizations is they're living above that red line there. They're living in the area where they've got guidelines and policies that they're trying to use to define culture, to define behavior. Cost a lot to put those in place, not nearly as effective. And then you get into organizations like this one city I was working with that had, I want to say, a 60,000-page manual of their rules and regulations and laws, and this is how we do what we do. Very costly to develop and maintain, and not very effective. I mean, the more rules you have, there's just more opportunities people figure out how to break them. You really want to, as an organization and as a leader, whether you're talking about leadership on your team, leadership in your organization, heck, leadership even in your family, the same model applies. Understand, get clear about what you're tolerating and what you don't, and then live with that. Keep that line active and reinforced, and you will be amazed at the power it has in an organization. I have transformed organizations. It doesn't happen overnight. It's typically, you'll start noticing it literally noticing it within 3 to 6 months if you've enrolled leadership in that conversation. And you'll actually see a transformation in an organization within 9 to 12. Typically, you'll start to notice the behaviors, because that's ultimately how you determine a culture. How are people behaving? I always like to say culture is what people do when there are no rules. Well, how do people show up? As an organization, you get the option to actually define that when you're intentional about shaping your culture. Questions there on culture? Those are the 2 primes I had on culture.
Johnson Sterling and Perkins. I'm curious how that transformation over time process works. You see it show up 6 to 9 to 12 months. Is that an active on-site project with a lot of hand-holding, a change project, or guidance and then watch?
Right. So the question is, how does that show up over time? Is it a lot of hand-holding, or is it get them started and just watch from afar? It really depends on the leader. It can be done both ways, equally effective. It really depends on the leader and the organization themselves. If you get what I call early adopters, you actually go into the organization, and through the process of defining what's tolerated, and through the process here of defining what's tolerated and what's not tolerated, you actually enroll people in it. And if you the trick is to get not the formal leaders, but the informal leaders in an organization. Those people that drive, general opinion, regardless of their position in the organization. And you know who those people are. When you get those people in and engaged in owning it, it can actually be self-maintained. But the leader, while they can't mandate it, they are pivotal in being the ones. And the best role for the leader is to call out when people are living into the culture on a regular basis. Managers can call out when they're living out. Let leaders be there calling out when they live in. And then it can be very much get them started and check in every quarter and see how they're doing. That's been one of the most effective. Did I answer your question? Okay. Any other questions regarding? Yes.
Yeah. How do you go about pulling out those bad behaviors? Like specifically, as in, do you do it kind of like one-on-one in a group session? How quickly do you do it? Are you hard on it every single time? Like, how do you do that?
Okay, excellent. The question was, how do you go about calling out those bad behaviors when they happen? Excellent question. What I would offer to you is the most important thing is how quickly you do it. The time gap between the act and when it's called out is probably the most important thing. And then the individual versus in a group format, I think that's more situational. If it's someone who you think just stumbled on it or has done it all, pull them aside, let them know. The first time, I can do it in a non-public forum. The second, third, and fourth time, it's going to be more public. But the immediacy is so important. If someone walks into, and then it's just situational. If someone walks into the room and you've got a policy there that, you know, respecting one another, which is the most critical one in any culture, and you see that happen right then, right there, regardless of who's around, that's the moment to do it. And that's when it's most effective. Did I answer? Perfect. Any other questions just on culture, strategy? Okay, and I'll take some at the end as well. All right, so then I want to talk about implementation, strategy and culture together, how these two pieces come together, and how each of you can leverage this knowledge of culture in service of your organization moving forward. We're ultimately up here, the culture, the strategy, it's all in service of getting business results. So, of course, any strategy that you're doing should be tied to business results. Any culture that you're articulating should be tied to the business results that you want to get. So let me share with you a little bit about implementation, and I'll lay culture over it. So this is another prime. I highly recommend you go in and you take a look at this. It's called Red Point, and it's about focusing an organization on the fewest, most important initiatives that they need to do in order to move the needle from where they are to where they need to be. If you're going to turn a ship around, the hardest and most important thing to do first is to get it off of the dock. And that's where all the energy is. I mean, that's the hardest thing, is to get this started. So my advice to you always is just jump in and get something started. If you've got this 2-year goal that you're working on, what has to happen? What must be true at the end of 90 days? And we call those date certain outcomes, which you'll see. The Red Point's a methodology that's made up of these elements. You'll see some of the core prime in there that I shared with you earlier. You'll see the as is, and you'll see which was part of our first conversation. You'll see the date certain outcome, which is a step in getting towards that 2B that we talked about. All right? So initiatives, you want to identify the critical few. That typically does not mean 7, 8, 9, or 10. It doesn't even mean 5 or 6. I encourage people to always start in the 2 to 3. If you're thinking about what are the 2 to 3 most important things to get done, you're probably at the right level for a strategic initiative. If you're coming up with 10, you're way too low. You're not only going to overwhelm your organization, you're going to end up with too many things to track and to manage, but it's probably not at the right strategic level. I always encourage leaders to do what they and only they can do, and a leader should say, we need to do that over there. These are the 3 big things we need to do, and then allow the next tier in the organization to define the details of how that gets done. So the leader at every level should be defining the what and the next tier. And I've done this where we've gone 6, 7, 8, 9 tiers down into the organization, and that is powerful. When you talk about an organization that is aligned around a common vision and direction, when you get that many, I've worked where I've gotten 40, 50% of the organization engaged in the process. And I'm talking 10, 20,000 person organizations. So Red Point, let me go through this quickly. Red Point has a couple of key initiatives. The first is the as is. You knew that from the core prime that you've done. There's governance, which is you've got to figure out who are the critical few people who have the most to lose or gain in those initiatives. And you've got to identify them. Once again, it's 3 or 4 people, not 7 to 10. We tend to want to bring everybody in, and it slows things down dramatically. Include people in the process, get a core team to move forward quickly, okay? So governance is one of the most important things. Figure out those critical few people. Establish governance for your 90-day, whether they're 90-day or 6-month or 1-year initiatives. Establish a governance. These are the people whose primary role is to remove any obstacles to hitting those date certain outcomes that you're going to define. Okay? Communications. Communicate. You hear that all the time. People don't, often in these implementations and in a strategy, they'll develop a big strategy, they'll figure out their culture, they'll say, let's go forth and make this happen, and they'll get started, and all the communication that was there during the strategy process all of a sudden goes away because they think people just learn by osmosis. No. During your implementation, Communications is your friend. It is the way you're going to, I always like to tell people, you need to define your narrative before others define it for you. And that's the role of communication. So get clear about what 2 or 3 initiatives you want to create, establish governance, be proactive in owning your communications, and then make sure you're managing risk. So it's a simple model. It really works. When I say I've done it with nations, I've done it with major cities, I've done it with large corporations. When you break it down into 90-day increments, there's a sense of urgency there that you can't create in any other way. You no longer can, when I've got something that's due next year, let me tell you, it's not on my mind until next year, okay? Until I'm usually within 30 to 60 days. So create that constant sense of urgency within your groups. It's a key lever, and it starts to set a pattern in your culture as well. Okay, so these are the 5 parts. Your as is, you know where you are. Your date, certain outcome, you're going to come together and collectively define. You're going to establish your governance. And trust me, it's not governance that meets each week. It's governance that meets initially and then meets when needed. You got to go light with this implementation if you really want to have a successful strategy rollout. And now culture, the role of culture in all this. Why does culture matter? Well, when you're moving from the as is to the to be, living into your strategy, trying to realize your vision, if you are not intentional about culture, what'll it do? It'll eat breakfast and lunch, right? Many organizations go out there and they're trying to go from the as is to the to be, and what happens is the sort of like the gravity of culture just picks them up and swings them back around. Any system, if you're not intentional about it, will always figure out how to get back to where it was. That is the natural pattern of any system, to get back to what it considers stasis. When you're really trying to make a transformation in an organization, a change or a transformation, it's typically about shifting how you're doing what you're doing, how you're thinking about what you're doing, and how you're showing up each and every day. That's when real change happens. That's when real results are available to you. What we recommend, of course, is being very intentional about starting with your as is, embracing the culture as part of that solution, and moving forward into the to be. Questions there. I've shared with you 2 things on implementation. The red point, which is a framework and a model. I encourage you to print that previous slide out and just reference that as you're looking about, okay, how do I get this, how do I move this forward? How do I get results? Think about results in 90 days. And then this is just recognizing the role of culture in that implementation. Questions on the implementation side? Yes. Could you stand up, please, and identify yourself?
So in thinking about culture, culture can't be mandated, but it can be encouraged. When strategy is mandated, if there's a small group who's sort of coming to those decisions, having those conversations about why this change is needed and the like, what's the interplay between culture, which needs to be, there is sort of that bottom-up role with that strategy? Is the strategy, does that need to have bottom-up infused into it as well? I wonder if everybody...
Okay, so the question is, what's the role, how do you sort of bring culture and strategy together when the strategy might have been developed by a smaller group of people, and culture, you recognize, needs to be more universally known and recognized? My first thought would be your strategy should never be developed by a small group of people. In the 33, 34 years I've been doing this, it's just not a proven model for me. There are leaders that may do that. I do believe that a small leadership group should start the process. The idea here is, I like to think of it as sort of Swiss cheese. Leaders should always be creating just enough form out there that the voids are really clear. Because the way you build, the way you transform an organization is you develop an inspiring, compelling vision that people want to make happen. The way people want to make happen is that they've been a part of creating it. The most powerful tool a leader has in strategy is to invite others in the process. Now, the leader doesn't abdicate the leader still stands up and say, we're going in that direction. The leader should always stand up and say the what. This is what we need to do. And that's typically, I'll typically bring the leader and their 7 or 8 top leadership team together. And I heard someone else talk, I think you were referring to, you'll bring them together for a half day or day. And I'm not asking them to define the strategy or the vision. I'm asking them to start the strategy and to start the vision. The leader should always start the vision. But then I have to have a real candid conversation with them, like, how much of this is available now for the rest of your organization to own? How much of this can they actually put their fingerprint on? Then we take that content and we take it out to the organization. And in the process, this is where culture and strategy come together. You should be doing both at the same time. When you're developing the strategy, starting with the leader, the leadership, and then the rest of the organization, you should be talking about what's the compelling vision we want to create, what's the strategy to get there, and who and how do we need to be to make that happen. Those are your 3 fundamental questions that you're addressing when you're going through Core Prime and you're really integrating culture and strategy. Did I address your question? Okay. Any other questions in culture? All right. Let me go to one more slide here. I'm good on time? Okay. So I wanted to share with you, once again, this is a packed slide, but it's one of those I think you can just take off and appreciate. I wanted to share with you what successful leaders, what I've done in my own business and what I've coached other leaders to do over time, what successful leaders do during strategic implementation, that it helps integrate strategy, cultures together in service of getting business results. And I should say business results, for me, almost always has something to do with the customer experience. That is what I would say for the last 5 or 6 years, most of my clients are recognizing the power of being intentional about their culture, which is how their employees are feeling about it. I think Dan was talking about this earlier, how their employees are feeling, and being very intentional about the customer experience that they're creating, which is how their customers are experiencing them. If you're not in that conversation right now, I encourage you to start thinking not about customer service, but about your customer experience. So let me share with you, I have, I think, 4 areas that I want to talk about. One is establish an awareness of your organization's current and desired culture. When you're talking about culture, it's so easy to get overwhelmed. Where do I start? Start where you are. What's true today? Get really clear. Put that little line up on the board and say, okay, we've got 10 people in the room. What are we tolerating and what aren't we tolerating? You will be surprised at what comes up when you give people, and especially if you give them the marker that they can put up what they want. Oof, you'll be surprised what shows up. But it's that truth and that authenticity, in that is the power to transform that organization. So do a culture inventory, what's tolerated, what's not tolerated, and then with the same group of people, or now in a broader group, because once a group of people once the organization hears that someone asked them what was going on and actually listened, you're going to have 12 the first time, you're going to have 25 for the second part, which is now define the desired culture. What is it that you want to tolerate and don't? It's a very simple model. Anyone can do it, and it is amazingly powerful. Okay, so one is establish an awareness of what's actually true in the organization with regard to culture. The second I would offer is increase the readiness of your organization and your culture for implementation. The success of implementation occurs during your strategy development. You cannot develop a strategy and then say, okay, let's implement, what do we need? It's like, no, if you haven't been thinking about implementation from the beginning of development, you're way behind the power curve. You get people will implement something that they feel co-ownership with. And the way they feel co-ownership is inviting them into the process early. Let the leaders powwow and say, this is kind of what we need to do, and then give it to this group to say, hey, I need you to take this to the next level. I sometimes hear leaders say, oh yeah, but our people, they don't really understand what's going on outside. Well, then how are they going to implement it? They're not understanding it enough to appreciate the strategic direction. You can't expect that they're going to understand it enough. And if you don't have the right people, well, that's a leadership issue, okay? So it's this, I just encourage you to invite as many people in early as possible, okay? So enroll others early in strategy development in a meaningful way, and that is, the word meaningful is so important. You cannot be fake. If it's fake, it will be detected right away and the whole thing collapses. Invite the leaders and the laggards, the naysayers, because to not have their voice in the room, it inauthenticates the process, but to have their voices in the room, it actually helps over time to empower the leaders. It gives them a power. And the other thing I always tell leaders is don't spend time with your laggards. Invite them into the process, but do not spend time trying to get your laggards on board. Get your early adopters, get your visionary people, empower them, put them in pivotal roles, and acknowledge them for their successes. That's how you transform an organization, with a strategy and through culture. Build alignment early and proactively, and maintain it throughout. You can't, once you start this process in strategy development, there's a commitment to leaders to maintain that alignment throughout. People want their organization to be successful. And when they don't know how, that's called disempowered. When they don't understand what's happening or know how what they do matters in that strategy, it's disempowering. And the most effective thing I've seen leaders do is to give people back that power. And when they get it, they almost don't know what to do with it. They're like, but I don't want to have this. But then if you keep it going, they turn on, and I've seen organizations do a complete, 180 with that minimal effort. Okay, the third one is model the culture you want throughout the strategy development process. Everybody has to model the culture, but the leader is going to be in the spotlight. So you've got to model it absolutely the most. I said earlier, I think to your question, be swift and consistent when calling out behaviors incongruent with the new culture. Really important. Speed is the most urgent part of that. One of my favorite quotes is, the change you start with is the change you get. So how many times have you been in a strategy conversation where one of the things that comes out is we want to be more transparent about what's happening in our organization, even what's happening with our finances. We want to be transparent as an organization. I'm like, great. It's like, so we're going to share this with everybody? No. We don't want to share it with everybody yet. You can't, the change you start with is the change you get. You can't say you want to be open and embracing and include people. You can't say you want to be transparent and not share. You can't say you want to respect individuals and disrespect someone in the process. It just doesn't work that way. And that's one of the key things about modeling the behavior. You start with the leader, you get them clear, you go to the leadership, get them aligned and clear, and then empower them to go out into the organization. And then the last one is really communicate. Cannot say that enough. You've got to constantly remind people of the why. It's the first thing they forget. And I think you were speaking earlier about the why. Absolutely critical. Leaders, for me, it is the most often overlooked conversation. Leaders like, oh, no, we don't need to do that why thing. No, it's actually as important as the vision thing. You've got to have a clear why to do any, you have to have a clear why, a compelling reason to do anything different than what people are currently doing. So you have to proactively create and manage the narrative. I shared that with you earlier. I always say, if you don't write your story, somebody else will. And I've had organizations, federal agency, where when they weren't writing their story, there was actually a very formalized underground blog organization that was writing the story for the organization and putting it out. Congress was reading it and was reacting to it. And I'm like, you're letting someone else tell your story. You need to get out there and start defining who you are and what you're doing, and why because you exist, the world is a better place. Okay? And then last but not least, leverage a shared display. Throughout this whole process, shared display is so important. That's where the Cascade tool comes in. When you're going to take all this time to get people aligned and get them clear, get them excited, then you need to have a shared space for them to have that conversation and understand where they are, get an update about what's going on. I highly recommend throughout the process that you're having a shared tool. For me, I would look to see how quickly and how soon I bring the Cascade type tool into that conversation and start making the information available to everyone. Okay, so any questions on this last piece here, these four? This is the slide I'd really like you to print out and sort of keep with you. Thoughts there? Yes, over here, Dan?
Spoke a bit there about the spending time with the leaders, not the laggers.
Yes.
What do you do when you go into an organisation and you find out that the leadership team and maybe the whole organisation in general is spending too much time with the squeaky wheels with those laggers? How do you get them to change that?
Yeah, and it is so common. I mean, that's the phrase, the squeaky wheel always gets the oil. It's so true. But really when you walk in, I mean, you start with the leader, first of all, because if there are laggards, it's laggards also on the leadership team, is the first thing. So you start with the leader and you walk in and you have a real honest assessment to them. And for me, I come to, where are you spending your time? Where are you spending your time and where are you getting the results? That's one way if you need to give someone some very empirical information about how to do that. But really it's coming in and just sharing with them the power of the positive reinforcement of your early adopters and your leaders. We always feel like we have to get everybody in and everybody, no. Statistically, there is about 13%, 16 to 13% of an organization that will never get on board. They don't want to. It's not in their constitution, in their makeup. They are just the naysayers. And you'll know who they are. Your leaders, Stan, will know who they are, right? So just encourage them. The time you were spending there, let's reallocate that. And then I'll tell you, within a short period of time, they'll start to see the results. So yeah, it's really reminding them that they don't have to do what they've been doing since they were 5, which is try to get the mean kid in school to like them. No, just focus on the guys that are taking you forward and the girls that are taking you forward, and that's the winning solution. There's another question I saw. Another question on this? On the implementation strategy. Can you see the power and the role of where culture and strategy come together in implementation? What I'd ask you to do is think about one time when you've one or more positive strategic experiences if you had, and the role culture played. What I'd like to ask you to do, I'm only going to give you about a minute or two to do this, but just turn to the person next to you. So just buddy up, buzz groups, what I thought, and just share with them a moment when culture played a significant role in a strategic experience. So 2 reasons I wanted you to do that. First of all, I wanted you to recognize that you've had a lot of positive experiences, and if not, hear it from your neighbor. The second is to let you know that when you take your colleagues and your teams through this process, they're going to do exactly what you did just now. They're going to never feel like they have enough time to have the conversation you're asking them. Seriously. So I'm preparing you for this right now. They're not going to feel like they had enough time. You need to let them know up front you're going to be rushed. I'm only interested in your initial thinking, because statistically it's been proven that some of those first ideas are some of the best. So the days of spending 4 or 5, 6 days on strategy and culture and getting it ready for implementation, no. I can go into an organization right now, and we do this regularly, interview a few people, understand what the dynamics are, and within a few weeks have a very powerful, actionable strategy that's taken their culture into effect and they are ready to implement. That can be done in 2 to 4 weeks if you really expedite it. But people are going to feel just like you're feeling, and you're just going to have to be prepared to let them know. After like the second or third thing people say, it starts to get repetitive across the group. So that was your experience, so you'll know how they're going to feel when you do it. But who had a good example that they wanted to share of a time when culture played a significant role in strategy? Did anyone hear one from a colleague? Anybody? Yes.
We're a very small team.
Please stand up here.
Executive search. We're a very small team, but culture is our North Star. And we all have different strengths, and a time when we all have the same objective, but we utilize our individual strengths to get there, and it was very powerful.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Do you have one?
Yeah, I do. Sorry, big talker. But I had nothing. So we couldn't figure one out, and then we thought for a bit, and I thought of one, so I wanted to share it. There was a company that I worked for. It had about 150 employees. The owners just ruled out of their own value set that wasn't written down. And, it was a very loose thing, but it was very much who these 2 gentlemen were. They really wanted to sell the company. They had worked their whole lives. The employees were about 150 then. It was about 150 million in billing. It was about 150 employees. And we knew they wanted to sell. They were getting older, and they wanted to get out. So we knew they wanted to sell, and they told us that they were going to actually stop giving us raises for a year so that they could increase their margin so they could sell well. And no kidding, no one quit. And we loved them that much, and they had been dedicated to us for so long that we all stayed, and we're so excited when they sold.
Excellent. Another excellent example. So First of all, thank you so much for your time. It's my honor to be here. I'm excited by the individual conversations I've had. I have my colleague with me, Nick, over there. If you could just raise your hand. We're, like I said, we're from the clearing in Washington, D.C. We'll gladly talk to you, give you any insights or thoughts you might have. The tool, we actually met up with Carl because we went out and searched for a tool for some of our clients, and we chose Cascade as that tool. And we work, like I said, with federal government, Fortune 1000 and nonprofits, and we found the tool to be very effective. So it's a powerful shared display, and if you use it powerfully in your organization, it will really help you affect change and transformation. Thank you.